Oh, I'm jealous. It is beautiful.
No, COVID island. You don't want to be on this island. I'm
Okay.
not feeling good. I got
Okay.
the vid.
Okay. All right.
Okay, the time now is 3:05. I'd like to call the Community Development Committee to order. And as customary, we usually start with the invocation. And I would like to ask Councilwoman Parker, if you can, give us a short invocation or whatever the way you want to do it.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Mitchell.
Thank you.
Lord, thank you for bringing us all here on this another beautiful day in Charleston. Keep blessing us all and helping us make the right decisions. Thank you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. And public participation, I think we don't have anyone. I think Patrick said we don't have anyone signed up or no one online that is so far as
That is correct.
That's correct. Okay, we'll move around down to item number B, which is the approval of the April 20th and May 18th meeting. One was a joint meeting between the Planning Commission and the Community Development. If I can get a motion for those two.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Okay, it was moved in second, all vote by favor by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We move on down to old business is approval of the Affordable Housing Priority Status Agreement template. I think Ms. Johnson, you're going to explain that? Who's going to?
I think, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be explaining that one.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yes. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, so this is, one of those efforts that planning and housing and community development have been working on collaboratively with a lot of assistance from legal. In January, council adopted a resolution endorsing the priority status program. And so this template that's before you today would be kind of the boilerplate agreement that the city would enter into with any developer who was going to propose to come forward with 50% plus affordable units that they were doing just as an affordable housing developer or developer period. This would not necessarily be projects where the city has money in the project. In fact, this is aimed for that relatively small segment, but hopefully at some point it will grow, particularly with some of the other incentives that we're going to be trying in the future, I think, with other zoning incentives for affordable housing. So this would be for that segment of the population of housing developers out there that are interested in affordable housing, but they're not necessarily using city funds or city resources to deliver that housing. This is our way to try to fast track those projects and get them through our processes as quickly, as painlessly, and as limited amount of permitting dollars as possible. So this agreement would help basically keep that whole. If a developer were to choose after they made use of the program to, for whatever reason, no longer deliver on their affordable housing that they had agreed to, it provides for the city to get made whole out of that for basically the time and effort that the city put into fast tracking and moving their permits and processes through. With that, Gianna or Chloe or Magali, anyone, if I missed something, please feel free to add on. But that's what this agreement is. It is we're just trying to make sure that we have this correct and basically in the file for when we have our first priority status project to come forward.
All right.
Good afternoon. I would just add a couple points. This is an entirely voluntary process. And the idea is to set forth the parties' obligations, but to the extent that there's a situation where a developer has to pull out, there is an allowance for them to come forward and explain and show good cause as to why this occurred. Basically, factors beyond their control, which would not warrant them being penalized with the liquidated damages that this agreement would entail.
Thank you, Magali. That's a good point.
That's all right. Thank you very much. Anyone have any questions? I don't see any hands. If no one even have any questions, could we get a motion
Move for approval.
Second.
Okay, let's move in second. All in favor, but vote by saying aye.
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 Opposes? Ayes have it. And then we'll move around down to discussion. Number one, discussion of zoning
Mr.
amendment.
Chairman,
Yes,
if I might ask, so these got kind of broken up into individual ones for the purposes of the agenda, but we prepared a kind of comprehensive PowerPoint for the next 4 items. If
Okay.
it's to your preference and the committee's preference, can we open all 4 of these items at once and just between myself and legal be able to go through them?
that's fine. Anyone have any problem with that? Any committee members? No problems? Go for it.
Awesome. All right, all right, so hopefully everyone can see the PowerPoint screen here.
Mhm.
All right, so excellent. So the first one, I'm going to actually turn over to Magali, who's going to walk us through this amendment that she's been working on at the direction of council.
Yes, so this proposal comes to us after a recent request from council during a BAR appeal of a demolition after the fact denial. And so because our ordinance is currently lacking in provisions that address people who intentionally demolish structures, where after the fact, or intentionally demolish structures and then seek after the fact approval from the BAR. So the idea would be if a property had obtained a denial in the past for a demolition, and then within the next 5 years again came for an after the fact approval, the presumption would be that the demolition was intentional. And that would allow us to have specific penalties. Those are set forth at 116 of the code, which are up to $500 and or 30 days in jail for each violation. And every day that the violation continues to be in place would be a separate offense. Of course, there would need to be an ability of an applicant to come forward and show circumstances to indicate that this was not an intentional demolition. But the idea again is that the burden is on them to show that it wasn't intentional, and then we would look at some factors to see whether or not that burden has been overcome.
Okay. Anyone have any questions on that?
Nope.
Councilwoman, Councilman Appel. I think I saw
Thank
your
you.
hand. I'm getting dark. Okay, go ahead.
And I'm going to try to pick my times to talk today. I can probably talk on each one of these at a length that nobody wants to hear, but one thing we may want to think about, and I've seen this in some other jurisdictions, is when you are caught with a zoning violation of a certain magnitude, you essentially have like a development freeze on the property for a period of years. So Charleston County has something where if they catch you violating their grand tree ordinance, where rather than go through the normal process of, getting zoning approvals for grand tree variances and things of that nature, you just go ahead and clear cut it. They'll just like red tag your property and you can't pull permits for years. And that's seen as a strong incentive for people not to violate the rules, because oftentimes, and I'm not saying this has ever happened with me, but you'll have people go to land use attorneys and say, rather than go through this tough, difficult regulatory approval process, what's the worst that can happen if I just go ahead and do it, take matters into my own hands? What's the worst consequence that can befall me? Normally, lawyers will say, they're just zoning they're misdemeanors. It's a fine. Technically, you could be put in jail, although I've never heard of anybody going to jail for a zoning violation, although I think Sullivan's Island came close to doing it once. But when you tell a client that if you get caught, you can't develop the property for 2 years, 5 years, that is when it gets real. There's some careful legal and constitutional issues that need to be examined. I just wanted to kind of float that out there for what it's worth. Because like with any regulatory framework, you have to incentivize compliance and not make it so it's easier, cheaper to end run the system and just take matters into your own hands. So
Becomes a
that's
part of the cost.
Exactly.
It becomes right.
That's right. And so you just got to tweak those dials right. So we make sure everybody is incented to play by the rules. Thank y'all.
Any other one? Anybody else? Anyone else?
Yeah, as a follow-up, Councilman Appel, do you think that we should amend this and make this stronger then? Because $500 would just be the cost of doing business.
I certainly think we ought to look at it. This is just an idea I'm throwing out on a Zoom call. This can be complicated and subtle. But I certainly think it's something worth considering because, there's a lot of times when you're talking about the economic incentives here, there's a lot of money to be made if you could get one of these old Charleston singles that's fallen into the street over on the west side or wherever. And like you said, Councilman Gregory, I mean, $500 or even paying an attorney a few $1,000s to file an appeal and work through a resolution with us. I mean, that pales in comparison to the value that's created by essentially bulldogging your way through the process. So we just got to make sure the carrots and sticks are tuned properly here.
Okay, anyone else? Because I want to ask a quick question before.
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Parker has her hand
Oh,
up.
Councilman Parker, I can't see you. Okay.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Mr. Summerfield or Ms. Creech, where does this line up with the county? Like in comparison?
I'm not aware of a specific county provision addressing after the fact demolitions or anything, similar, but I would be happy to look into a different type of penalty as Councilman Pell suggested in terms of a freeze, but I'm not familiar with that specific section of the county code.
Okay, because I too understand the freeze for the Grand Oaks, that we certainly see that here on James Island. So I would be curious what other historic districts or areas, what other municipalities do in this case. I tend to agree with Councilmember Appel that, a freeze of some sort or not being able to pull permits and things like that certainly seem to make a better case than $500. But I would also like to understand the constitutional and the aspect and the property rights and all of that. So if that can be something that could be presented in addition to this. That's it. Thanks.
That's it. The question I want to ask, we know that mostly under the BAR jurisdiction, we know that most of the things that is south of Calhoun Street is under the BAR jurisdiction, preservation, mostly. And say if someone have a building scenario, buildings, and they have a big seal on the building preservation, and you go and do something to that building on the outside and it was deferred back and forth, you do it after the fact. And going for after the fact approval, you know what I'm saying? And to me, that's against all the rules and regulations that we have. So even to me, if you see a big seal on that building, you should know that from the beginning that you have to get approval from the BAR before you touch anything outside outside the building per se. And that's a question I would like to ask on that particular item. And even a contractor that you have, he should know that also. He or she or whoever it is should know that once they see that they have to go get approval before doing anything to that particular outside of that building when you didn't get any approval for it. So that's a question I want to ask. How would we deal with something like that?
Mr. Chairman, the mayor has his hand up,
That's a
followed
question.
by Councilmember Gregory.
That's a question I would like to ask. That's the question I'm asking.
Does anybody want to address that
Anybody
question?
gonna address that question?
I'm happy to just to.
I can't say that I can.
This is sort of off the cuff, but I mean, as we know, ignorance of the law is not a defense to anything. So the idea here is when we have a reason to believe that there has been an intentional circumvention of the ordinance is to craft specific penalties that make it a deterrent for people to do that. And I certainly think it's worth looking at what other jurisdictions have done to make that a greater deterrent. Because as it stands, you know, what we're able to do is up to 30 days in jail and or the $500 just for general code violations. But we'll be glad to look into that.
Yeah, because I said, once you see a seal on it, preservation on the building itself, once you see that seal on it, you should know that you have to go get permission or go to BR and get approval before touching anything outside of that particular historical building. And that's one thing I was asking, so I can make sure I'm on the right page with that. Okay. And so that's, well, I know I saw the mayor hands up. I see Councilman Gregory hands up.
Yeah.
So we can go with that. We'll go that way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just so I be clear, and I understand we want to make this a little punitive, which is there's almost no penalty now, if I'm not mistaken. The $500 is per day as well, isn't it? So if like it persisted for 20 days, it would potentially be a $10,000 fine?
Yes, that's correct.
And how long can that run?
Definitely.
Indefinitely. So it could add up, you know, and pretty, $500 a day adds up pretty quick. I mean, you could have a substantial potential fine liability, you know, if you do it per day. I just thought I'd highlight that. Thanks.
Okay. Councilman Gregory?
Yeah, I missed that, Mayor, and you're absolutely correct. My question is, how pervasive is this? Do we have numbers of violations?
Councilman, I don't know that we have the data at the moment. Anecdotally, I can tell you that I'm dealing with a handful of these situations right now between me and my team that we're working on, and that we customarily have an after the fact item at either BAR, more often BAR small than BAR large, but we probably have maybe 1 or 2 a month, probably on average. But we can try to pull some more specific numbers. That's anecdotal. Don't quote me on those numbers, but in general, I would say we usually have some kind of after the fact review every month or every other month. There's something that ends up coming before the board on that.
And how do they resolve?
So
Generally?
it can be a mix. Many of them do result. It depends on the extent of what the after the fact is.
Mhm.
Many of them will correct within, they'll address the issue. They'll either be required by the BAR to put back in kind what they took out, to very much like the settlement that kind of initiated this conversation that Ms. Creed was working on, that prompted this amendment. You know, they may be required to put back a structure that's similar to, or elements of the structure that are similar to what they demolished. Very few of them actually end up going to the appeal process like the one that prompted this. Most folks do try to work to figure out between staff, the board, and the applicant a solution to address what they did that they didn't get a permit for.
So for the most part, folks are following the rules, sounds like.
Or once it's been found out that they didn't follow the rules, they work to address it so that they can come into compliance.
Okay.
I think most people do want to be compliant with our code. Sometimes legitimately folks don't know. Other times they do know. Maybe the contractor's done something, or their nephew who was helping them out did something that they shouldn't have, and then they work to correct.
Let me frame the question a little different. Comparatively speaking, okay, there's a much smaller number of folks that are not adhering to the rules than are.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
okay,
most
all
people are try to work within our rules and
Okay.
find out how to do things appropriately.
Okay, thank you. Is this something that perhaps we should defer? But, you know,
I don't know.
I'm not making a motion because I did notice the $500 per day.
Right.
Yeah, it's per day, and if I may say,
Yeah, yeah, it's there.
I think the number that Robert cited is about correct. It's a handful of cases, maybe a
Right.
dozen cases a year.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's not like a, out of control thing. Let's put something like this in place, and if we feel we need to make it more punitive later on, we can always do that.
And the fine up to 500. What does that give us? As opposed to the fine is 500 or the fine is $1,000.
Well, personally, I think you always need to leave some discretion. I mean, you might have a case where somebody's literally demolishing
Front steps.
some simple something, and maybe it was understandable or something, But anyway,
Mhm.
I think we always in our ordinances give the adjudicator some discretion, isn't that right?
Yes, this is just to provide some flexibility.
I don't know. And let me ask another question before I get Councilwoman Parker.
Can I do a follow-up?
Yes, okay.
Yeah, it isn't isn't I thought that 1-16 was $1,000 or something. Did I read that incorrectly?
Well, when you add in all the court costs and fees, it comes up to 1,087, but the actual
Okay,
fine is 500.
gotcha.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And even with that, if there's a contractor that was doing it, is the contractor any way liable at all with their license? That would come under the business license, I guess. But just asking.
I think that, Councilman, I think that's been a conversation about, and in fact, you'll see in a later amendment that we're going to talk to about not just property owners being responsible for compliance, but other folks that are maybe involved related to one of our code requirements being subject to the penalties. And I think that's one of the things we do need to talk about, because we do often hear where we do have these situations where after the fact, it's something that comes up in signage sometimes,
Right.
where a sign contractor may put up a sign that they have not gotten a permit for. And then we have to go back and deal with the property owner who, quite often it's actually a tenant who's dealing with that. So I think that is a question we need to have and need to talk about for dealing comprehensively with folks that may not be following all the rules, is addressing whether or not we want to take folks who are like a contractor to our business licensing committee to address any kind of penalties there, but that's currently not contemplated in this amendment.
All right, thank you. Councilwoman Parker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I see it here, but I just want to confirm, this is just changing it for the historic district only, correct? Not the rest, not the entire city of Charleston.
Oh,
Yes, this is only where VAR approval is required for a demolition. This does not apply to properties that would be within the jurisdiction of the DRB.
thank you. So do we need a motion for that or just going on with the discussion?
Let's go with because we're doing them all together, right?
Okay.
All right, and Magley, you have the next one as well.
Yes, my turn again. So this is a rather simple clarification that we're seeking to a couple definitions in the zoning ordinance. The first is to add residential use following the definition of dwelling unit. And the second is to add accommodations use to the definition of sleeping unit. The basis for this request comes from a current BZA appeal that we are litigating. But our position is that the ordinance is not ambiguous. And when you read it as a whole, there's no question that a dwelling unit refers to a residential use, being minimum of 30 days occupancy versus accommodations being 29 days maximum. And this is relevant in the context of conversions. And so the position is that a simple additional clarification doesn't hurt us in any way. And so while we're addressing this specific appeal, we recommend this minor clarification.
Anyone have any questions on that? But I want to make sure because I can't see it all. Any questions?
Councilman Appel, I think, wants to be recognized.
Okay, Councilman Powell.
Thank you. So is the idea to clarify the distinction between a unit and a room within a unit?
It's to clarify that the definition, the strict definition of a dwelling unit does not refer to a physical description of the space, but rather the use of the space, particularly when we're talking about a conversion to an accommodations use.
I see. Got it. Anything we can do to make our ordinances more clear, I think it's great.
Okay, any other questions? Moving right along.
All right, so the next amendment that I wanted to update the committee on is we have been working on an amendment. Again, this is one that's the DRB, the Design Review Board, staff and legal have been collaborating on. This is something that was at the request of members of council to take a look at ways that we can make, particularly in the DRB area of our purview, more predictability and clear guidance as it relates to demolition requests. And so the amendment that we're working on and that we've workshopped with the Design Review Board, it's based off of language that exists in Columbia and Savannah's ordinances. So we're using best practices from other cities that have some similar historic districts. And so this amendment would create some clear standards for determining when a demolition review is for a structure that contributes to the historic character of an area. Right now, our definition is essentially more than 50 years old. This would provide some very specific direction and a test that the DRB and a property owner considering demolition can objectively look at and say, okay, does my property meet this contribution test? And if it does, okay, I'm going to have a hard time getting demolition approval for this. And if it doesn't, then honestly, I should have a really good case for being able to demolish my 50-plus-year-old structure. And it does, like I said, it also provides guidance for older structures that do not meet the test for the board to consider and think about for approving demolition of those greater than 50-year-old structures, but not having met the test as a contributor to the historic character of that area. We do have one outstanding question from the workshop that I would just mention to the committee and that we are open to some additional feedback on. It's one of the questions we'll take to Planning Commission as well. And that is in some ordinances we reviewed, they provide a economic factor as one of the things that can be looked at by the review board. In other communities, they are very strict and can take no position on any economic factor being able to be considered. So that's kind of an outstanding question for this particular amendment, but this is where we're at. The team that's worked on this has done a really good job of, I think, balancing Charleston's history with preservation with some really good best practices that we see in other communities.
Question?
Councilwoman Parker, I see your hands up, and then we'll go to Councilman Gregory.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Summerfield. So we're still keeping it. The test is still one of the criteria is going to be must be 50 years of age. So that was an old that was in the old, and we're keeping that. So it still has to be over 50 years.
Yeah, so that is the standard. The
Right.
standard for something being historic, and as I'm approaching that number, I sometimes feel like that's not not the appropriate number. I'm closing in on that one here in the next year or so, but that is the standard. That's the Secretary of the Interior uses that. That's one of the base criteria for preservation. So we can continue to have conversations around, do we want to do an older, a bigger number for that? But 50 is essentially the standard that you do see most predominantly in preservation ordinances, period, but particularly in demolition ordinances, where you sometimes have this higher threshold for review prior to approving a demolition.
No, yeah, I don't know about the 50, or increasing the 50, but are we seeing demos in the less than 50? I mean, we're talking now the 70s, I mean, are we seeing an issue there with, they're not over 50, they're not historic, but the 70s and 80s, things like that. I guess no one wants them.
Yeah, so we do get demos for some of those buildings. But they don't meet our requirements for board review, and so they're able to move through generally pretty specifically. This would be in order to trigger board review or DRB review. You have to first be 50 plus years old. And then we look at these other criteria to determine what the board should do, whether they should approve demolition or not approve demolition.
Right. I'm sorry.
That would be these other test items.
Yeah. And so I guess I just don't see what the test items are going to be. I mean, so you haven't create clear standards. You just haven't come up with those standards yet.
Yeah, no, we have. I apologize. As I was putting together the slides, it was text overload here on the slide, but we do have those. I'm happy to share those as a memo with the committee, but they're essentially, they look at whether the structure is, whether it's location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, cultural significance, or association have make it a significant building. Were there any events of any significance that occurred at the building, whether it's associated with a person of significance from the past, whether the structure embodies a distinctive type, period, or method of construction. They're all very objective criteria that require a historical analysis in order to make the determination, but they're very specific criteria, and I'm happy to share those with the members of the committee in a separate memo. But as I tried to put that all on a PowerPoint, it was very messy.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, please, I would love to see that. And then just quickly, can you explain, I mean, to what degree economic factors should be considered? I mean, what economic factors?
Well, so in some ordinances we found when we were doing the research on this, there are jurisdictions that include language like that the cost to repair the building or rehab the building is 2.5 times the value of the property. And so at that point, demolition can be considered versus preservation of the building. So there's some tests that say that include economics as one of the factors that can be looked at. They can vary widely in jurisdictions that do include an economic factor, from a very general statement of it would cost more to repair than the property is worth, to something like some kind of math equation that says rehabilitation of the structure would be more than X of the property value, and therefore it's eligible for demolition.
I thought that we already had those on the books.
Magali can correct me if I'm wrong, because I think she's been helping with this one, but no, I don't think we have an economic test on the books.
Our current ordinance does not have any economic hardship consideration for the DRB, so that's one possibility.
So, right. So currently we've just sort of been going off of design of if DRB deems it historic or not, or.
Yeah.
So we're going to have these in writing now. Okay.
Right, that's what it is. Coming up with,
Yeah.
with something in place so they can have something to look at, because otherwise it was just open.
Right. Yeah. Right now, it just says if it's more than 50 years old, the board should think about it before it's demoed. And it's not. It can be more structured than that, clearly, and that's the goal.
Okay, Mr. Mayor?
I think I was before the mayor, but go
Well, I
ahead.
didn't see your hands. The
That's
mayor
all right.
hand
No.
was up.
I think the point of all this was to create some guidance for those properties over 50 years old that had some character to them, for lack of a better word. And, we were struggling, some folks were struggling to get demolitions approved for a 50-plus-year-old building that, I mean, almost anyone would agree, had no real character to it, for, again, just using a single word. I would ask the question, I don't think we use economic hardship with any of our other boards, the BAR, or anything like that. And I know the DRB handles different areas, but personally, unless I'm wrong, I think that would be a slippery slope for us to start going down. If we have the ability to make some judgments about the historical nature and the character of a property, you can always get somebody to stand up and say, oh, it's going to cost me so much more money to do this than that. I just think the economic hardship, particularly since we don't do it in the historic district, I would urge us to stay away from that. Thanks.
Councilman Gregory?
Yeah, my question was, remember the property, I think it was on Romney Street? The
track?
owner wanted to tear it down,
Mhm.
okay, and build something new. And eventually he was able to do that. And I'm wondering whether or not that's an example of what we're talking about. Do you recall it, Mr. Summerfield? It was in the newspaper, and there was this guy that he came home. He wanted to tear it down, and he wanted to build new affordable housing. And eventually, he was allowed to do that.
Yeah, so that one, so different jurisdiction, different set of tests, because that was in BAR and this is DRB, so slightly different area. However,
What was it, BAR? I didn't know that. Okay.
yeah,
On Romney Street?
Yeah, BR's all
Okay.
over.
All right.
yeah, that was BAR.
Okay.
BAR small on that one.
All right. Gotcha. All right. Understand that.
But we did have the one that you all did a settlement for out on, I believe it was out on Folly, where the structure had quite a bit of issues. There were questions about whether or not it's the structure embodied a distinct character or type or what have you. It was the last of its kind on the street. It used to have like 3 or 4 other, I think we call them sister houses is the term that our preservationists use most often. That if this criteria had been in place at that time, I think the board would have actually maybe voted to approve the demolition. But it ended up having to go, I think, we ended up doing a settlement to approve that demolition via council. So that would be an example where the board, because of the more the additional need for criteria, voted to deny the demolition of that structure, that with these rules in place, I think that structure would not have passed the don't demo test, which would have then given the board more guidance to recommend for approval of that demolition.
Is that the Wilson building? Charlie Wilson?
Councilwoman Parker, I think that's out towards your area. I think you had actually commented on that one. I can't remember. I thought it was Falk Road.
I did too, with both of us.
It's that corner property.
Yes.
Used to have a store, I think, on the corner, and a car hit it. And then there was this other house right next door that was kind of the last piece of that kind of row of structures out there on the island.
Yes. What was the question? Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Councilwoman Parker, you had your hands up?
I think I just forgot. I forgot to put it down. So Councilmember Appel, I can give you the floor, or just while we're on this though, Ms. Creech, I would like to know, I mean, just as far as property rights go, I mean, I'm all for making this much more clear and concise, obviously. I mean, this is a big part of, development, and when people are buying or selling, I mean, this is a big component. So anything we can do to clarify, obviously, I'm all for it. But I am just curious as far as property rights go. I mean, again, we're creating, this litmus test of this board comprised of volunteer citizens or whatever it may be, and city staff to say, this, we deem this historic because XYZ, as far as property rights go, we can do that, or is there a level where it has to sort of, balance out?
I think that what we are proposing is still within the framework of what is existing. It's just more specific. So I don't think if you're looking at it in the context of property rights, we're not taking more away. We're making a more clear distinction about when and how these things happen.
Well, I get, okay, then how they are now. I mean, are they impeding on property rights at all? I guess is my question.
We don't believe that there's any property right or other violation with the current framework, but the idea is to make it more flexible and more clear for our board members and for people who are appearing before the board.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Aparo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you tuned in to today's meeting, hoping to talk about affordable housing and haven't heard a whole lot about affordable housing yet, I've got something for you here. So we all love historic preservation. It's what made and has made Charleston so special and so unique. Charleston invented modern historic preservation regulation in the 30s. But it's a complicated question, and it's a complicated issue. And here's what I mean, especially when you start talking about historic preservation off the peninsula. Because when you're talking about the DRB, you're talking about West Ashley, James Island, you're talking Highway 17, Sam Rittenberg, Folly Road, things of that nature. Let's say a developer comes in, wants to do an affordable housing development, but there's a gas station on the property or a mini mart or something that's 65 years old, but it's not the Taj Mahal, it's not something south of Broad, it's just an old structure. This is the kind of regulation that's currently on the books that allows people to mobilize that or don't want to see this affordable housing near their neighborhood. They can come to these DRB meetings. They can talk about how, this was the first BP station in Charleston and all this historical stuff, but it's pretextual. And these things are designed and used often time and time again, not just in Charleston, but all over the country to thwart developments that people do not want to see. And that's the kind of stuff we've got to be cognizant of as we're reviewing these regulations and things like that. So I think adding these additional criteria and standards are very important, because right now, Councilman Parker, to your point, I mean, it is basically just an open-ended, unbridled discretion fest for the DRB. And it's just such a blunt tool of just saying, if you're 50 years or older, you're just this, historic structure. I mean, you could be, we were just talking the other day about those structures on the corner of 17 and Wapu Road, Limehouse property. I mean, I don't know how old those things are, but I don't care if those are 200 years old, they're horrible and they should come down. And there shouldn't be a board situation. I mean, I deal with litigation all the time where opponents of projects will just appeal these zoning board decisions for 5, 6, 7 years just to delay projects they don't like, and just try to smoke people out. So, we got to be very careful with how we balance this and how we structure this, especially the further you get away from sort of the core historic gems on the peninsula. I mean, we've had a lot of good discussion on council and in this committee about, the historic preservation rules north of Lime Street on the peninsula and some of the adverse impacts that may have on things like affordable housing, things like gentrification, things of that nature. So again, I'm not hating on historic preservation. I got nothing but love for historic preservation, but we just need to be cognizant of all the trade-offs that come into play here. One other approach to historic preservation on, in places like West Ashley and James Island is to sort of more fundamentally change the framework, where instead of just having this sort of arbitrary starting point of 50 years or 60 years or whatever the case may be, you just sort of like identify through some sort of inventory what's actually historic out there in the world, by parcel. I mean, you just sort of identify things that legitimately are historic in nature and you protect those, but you don't just like apply these rules sweepingly down a whole corridor. I mean, I think we could all drive up and down Sam Rittenberg and view a lot of buildings that are 50 years or older that would be wonderful, that don't have much merit to them, right? And it would be great to see those structures give way for things like affordable housing or just general economic development. I mean, rules like this are actually in tension with some of our other goals in the city, affordable housing, revitalization, things of that nature. So just got to make sure we're striking the right balance to protect not only property rights, but also some of these other goals that are very laudable that we're trying to achieve in the city. So thought I would just mention that, but this is definitely an improvement of the status quo, no doubt.
Councilman, keep an ear out for when I do my budget ad hoc presentation. I think you'll be a happy camper.
I'm on the edge of my seat.
Councilman Gregory?
I'm sorry, I didn't take my hand down.
Oh, okay. You don't have a question. Okay, anything else? Right along. That's the last one?
No, sir. We've got a couple more.
Go right ahead.
All right. So this next one, for those of you who are on the TNT committee, or heard this part of the TNT committee report from council, are already somewhat familiar with, but Melissa has been working, Ms. Crothers has been working with the TNT committee on an amendment to the zoning code to address parking and storage of commercial vehicles. This would add a definition for commercial vehicles. It would place some limits on the timeframes that commercial vehicles may be parked in various zoning districts when they're not being parked by the owner of the property. It would specifically say that there's no overnight sleeping in these commercial vehicles in the specific zones that this ordinance is being added to address. And then it would make clear that, and this is where I was referring to earlier, it would make clear that not only the property owner, but the vehicle operator is responsible for compliance with these code requirements. This is one, as I mentioned, just updating community development on it. But this did pass out as a concept from TNT committee, and we are anticipating that this will be on Planning Commission in September for them to make a recommendation to council, and then it should come to council potentially in October.
So in that main frame, even with the big trucks, we have to find a mechanism to let them know that this is going to be illegal.
Yes, sir. So we'll need to do some kind of advertising marketing on this,
right.
Work with communications to get the word out.
That's what I'm saying. All righty. Anyone have any questions on that? Councilwoman Parker?
Just a quick comment, and because I know the mayor brought it up at TNT a few months back, and I agree. I just want, when we talk about residential, I know we kind of clarified this at TNT, but I just want to make that pretty clear again that, places like James Island, if someone has a commercial vehicle that they're parking on their personal property, that's not going to be affected.
No.
Correct. Yeah, if you have the landscaping business and you park your truck on your property, you're fine.
Fine. All right. Anyone have any questions?
Is my understanding, and Melissa's there in case I misunderstood.
Okay, we can move right along. No questions.
Awesome. All right, so this next one is to address a situation where we've been seeing a lot of interest in doing some recreation type activities as secondary kind of operations within other businesses, primarily restaurants. But under our limited business rules, you can't really do recreation type uses. And so this amendment will help address recreation uses as a secondary or subordinate use to some other principal use. So, just as for anyone listening to this, our limited business district is one of our low intensity commercial districts. It has a limited number of uses. It has restrictions on the hours of operation. And that's because you will find the LB district primarily adjacent to residential districts and other sensitive development like churches and schools and things of that nature. So many of our recreational activities, we're seeing a lot more kind of dual purpose types of businesses coming in where it's become very common to have a secondary activity such as pickleball. We've all had the pickleball conversations. Council has talked a lot about pickleball. That's one. Or there's, an interest in axe throwing. Who would have ever thought that axe throwing is something you want to go do before dinner or as an after dinner activity? Anyway, these things are becoming much more common. And so what this amendment seeks to do is it introduces some parameters for recreation type uses as an accessory use in the LB zoning district. And then it provides some operational limits that ensure that if a recreational use is an additive part of that business, that it truly is secondary to that permitted primary use, and that it'll have minimal impacts on any surrounding properties, again, consistent with the intent of the limited business district. This is one we've been working on with legal, and we think we have this ready. Our hope is to take this to the Planning Commission in September and get this to City Council in October. We do have one business that's currently requested a rezone that would no longer need to have that rezoning if this amendment were already in place or if this amendment goes through, which would be a good thing because in order for them to do the business model that they're proposing, they would need to upzone to GB, which is probably not the most appropriate zoning district for their location. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any questions? I want to make sure I don't miss anyone.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, yes. Oh, Councilwoman Parker.
So when you call secondary, truly secondary, how are you considering that? Is that a percentage? Is that an area? How are you considering?
Yeah, so as a part of the operational plan, we are requiring that essentially they can't operate the secondary activity if the primary activity is not also. So you can't go and play pickleball unless one, you're eating at again, I'm going to use restaurant as an example. So if you're at the restaurant and you want to play pickleball, great. You need to be at the restaurant though. So you need to be there to have lunch, whatever. As a part of their operating, they need to ensure that revenue from the secondary activity is secondary to the income from the primary activity. We chose to go with income because again, that is something that you do see, or revenue rather, not income, revenue, because that is something you do see more predominantly in these secondary operations, in part because things like creating the axe throwing lanes or a mini golf activity or a pickleball court, those can take up a fair amount of real estate. And so we didn't want to do percentage of lot area or what have you, because then that could get messy and not really be reflective of the use being secondary operationally to the whatever the primary activity is. So operational hours, they have to be consistent. You can't come do the secondary thing if the primary thing is closed. A revenue needs to be greater for the primary activity than the secondary activity. And I am missing something, I think. No, I think those were the two big things that kind of create that distinction between the primary and secondary use.
All right. Any questions? Any other questions anyway? No? Oh, Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Chairman, the mayor has.
Could you give me an example where this makes a difference?
Makes a difference. So we have, like I said, so we have a business right now that is in an LB zoning district. Under the current rules, LB does not allow for these recreational activities. In fact, many recreational activities are specifically prohibited per the zoning district requirement for LB. The proposal that we have here would allow for a recreational activity in a proposed restaurant, and that proposed restaurant, as part of their operation, as a part of their theming, they want to include an outdoor like putt space, like a mini golf greens, not mini golf like windmills and the other stuff, but they want to create little mini greens that people can, while they're waiting for their table or after they've had dinner, they want to go basically shoot a couple rounds of golf. So that would be the example, that's the real world example of a situation we have. But we have seen other examples where people have asked about doing a pickleball court as a part of, a restaurant. These more physical activities connected to dining experiences seem to be a thing that has a model out there right now.
So you can throw an axe in general business, but you can't in limited business?
Correct. As a part of a rush. Yes. Yeah. You can't do those recreation activities in limited business right now.
Gotcha. Oh boy. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, hold on. I do.
Ms. Parker.
I'm
Councilman
curious.
Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, Mr. Mayor, what you think. I mean, do you think that going to GB would be better, to allow those uses?
GB?
GB, going to GB, because
I
you'd have,
understood the question, but so much comes with that.
Yeah, general business, that's
That
the-
change.
okay. I guess you just thought it was, okay.
Yeah, that would be a big
Well,
change.
I mean, I guess just I'm curious
I
if
get it because, LB, for example, only
Limited.
lets you operate until certain times of night. General business, you can stay open 24 hours. If you wanted to have a facility where somebody could play pickleball, but you didn't want to have a facility that could be open 24 hours, I get it. That makes sense. I guess the axe throwing example is a kind of extreme example because, people might have certain feelings about throwing axes. Certainly seems like the other recreational uses to me would be fine in a limited business zoning, but anyway.
It's just one of those new trends, Mr. Mayor. You used to throw darts and now people are throwing axes.
I got you. Maybe I ought to try it sometime.
I'm not going there.
I know, I'm thinking we need to get the mayor to a brewery.
Any other questions? I don't know what the axe throwing. Any other questions? If not, you can proceed.
All right, so next we have, and this is another one that comes from the request of the members of council and specifically the CD committee that asked staff to look at our boards and find ways to broaden the pool of potential members. So we have an amendment that went to Planning Commission last night, and we're hoping to bring to City Council in September that would allow an employee of a business located in the city to serve even if they don't live in the city. Under our current rules, the only non-resident that can participate on one of our boards is if you own a business or the principal of the business. This will open up opportunity for participation. The greatest example that we've had is, architectural firms. We have any number of architectural firms that are located in the city of Charleston, but those architectural firms may only have one or two owners or principals of the business, but they may employ a dozen architects that don't live in the city, but are fully credentialed architects that could serve in our architect role and provide a greater number of folks that could be eligible to serve, but also a wider diversity of folks that could serve. And so we're proposing to make that change for both the BAR and both BAR boards and the DRB. And then we were asked to take a look at providing additional opportunities for lay persons to participate in the boards. The only board actually that doesn't have a lay person seat was our design review board. And so we are also proposing to add a lay person seat to the design review board, again, to open up the pool of folks participating, provide that additional opportunity for a different set of experiences for the board.
Councilwoman Parker?
Thank you. And we're not looking to add anything about geographical location or district.
So those are conversations we're still having. The thing about geographical districts is, well, we've been having a lot of discussions about how we would implement geography. Part of the problem is because these are more technical boards, they require people with certain, in general, they require people with certain specific categories of experience, professional and otherwise. And so then to try to segment that out by geography. So does that mean the architect comes from Daniel Island, the landscape architect comes from the peninsula, and the lawyer comes from West? So we're trying to still figure that out because we do think geographic diversity is important for the boards. In fact, Planning Commission is an example. The memo that I put on everybody's desk, we really are trying to get a person to serve on Planning Commission that's from a geographic area that's not already covered. The person who's leaving was the only person on the board from the Daniel Island, Cainhoy area. So that is definitely, Councilwoman, that is definitely a part of our ongoing conversation about how we address that. With these more technical boards like design review and BAR, that has become a difficult balancing act of how we might introduce that.
Councilman Appel? You're next.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've mentioned this before, I think at full council, and I just feel compelled to say it again, because again, I just deal with this on a day-to-day basis around the state. Fortunately, Charleston has not had a lot of these problems over the years, but there are situations in other jurisdictions where these quasi-judicial boards become very political and they become very policy-driven, outcome-oriented boards. And it creates enormous legal problems for the cities and counties. It creates liability. It frustrates goals like affordable housing, things of that nature. It is critical to put the very best people on these boards. It's about, to me, it's not so much about where you live and what's your professional background. It's about how serious you are and how committed you are to staying in your lane. And what I mean by that is these boards are not policy boards. Like we don't, you're on the DRB and somebody proposes a gas station on a piece of property and that gas station is allowed under zoning, the DRB is supposed to look at aesthetics. It's not there to talk about whether we like gas stations or not, or we like affordable housing projects or not. But that's oftentimes what they become. Again, not in Charleston, but I see this all the time in other places around the state. So it's much more about people understanding what the role of these boards are, understanding that they're there not to give their personal opinion on these projects and things of that nature. They're there to apply the facts that are presented at the hearing to the legal criteria that they're there to administer, right? These are quasi-judicial bodies. The judicial piece means these boards and these people on these boards function like judges do. And so when we talk about lay people being on the board, I don't have anything against lay people. I love lay people. I love everybody. But if you're suggesting lay people ought to be on this board because we just need like the common person's opinion voiced, that's actually like completely inappropriate for these boards. If you want to get right down to it, it's about, like, if you're on the BZA, it's about applying the variance test. It's a 4-part, very specific variance test. The test is not, do I like this or not? Or do I wish this was allowed under zoning or not, right? So again, I'm not, I think these proposals are fine. I just think it's incumbent upon us all when it comes time to nominating people, scouting people for these boards, the very important boards. It's about getting the right people in. And, there's just real negative consequences for not having the right people in. And so I hope some of that was helpful.
Okay, any other questions?
And just a comment, I think that,
Oh, okay.
I think the council member Appel is correct, because policy is made by council, not by these boards. And these boards have the responsibility to determine whether or not those policies are carrying out in accordance with our ordinance.
Correct.
Perfectly stated.
But if I may add, there are things like we're talking about clarifying issues here, clarifying, making things more clear for the DRB. And if and when they aren't followed, they don't make it. And again, we're talking about situations in West Ashley. This isn't just about James Island. I mean, for me, they don't even make it to council. It's not a council decision. These are ultimately decided by these boards. So.
Yeah, but we vote and determine whether or not we're going to accept it in most cases.
Oh, just so I'm clarifying. So, but the DRB can deny something, or BAR can deny something, and it doesn't always come to us. Am I correct or incorrect?
You're right. It would only come to us if it were appealed,
right,
and then settled, and then presented to us in the posture of a settlement agreement of some kind.
Right.
But these boards apply the ordinances that we write, that we approve. The issue comes in where these boards, and again, I want to be very, very clear. I'm not talking about any of our boards, any of our particular board members. The city of Charleston does not, you don't hear about the city of Charleston's boards getting into these kind of problems. But y'all, please trust me. We can talk about this off air sometimes if you're interested in some of the details and some of these cases I've seen over the years. I mean, everything from, it would just blow your mind. I mean, I have caught DRB members in other jurisdictions in litigation collaborating and colluding with each other on email on ways to pretextually deny by right projects. Okay. That's when boards get out of control. And it happens, and it's real, and it frustrates people's property rights, and it kills affordable housing projects, and it kills economic development, and it helps, foster some very negative and toxic dynamics. And these boards have a lot of power. And the problem is, even if you structure these ordinances wonderfully with all these additional criteria and clarifications, if you don't have the right people on these boards, they just disregard it. They just say, we don't care. Here's how we're going to vote. And that's what creates the problem. And that's why these boards are so, the line between, a good functioning board and a completely out of control board is so important, right? Because to, Caroline's point, once they rule, and you're on the other side of that adverse ruling, your next step is to take it to court. And we're the defendant. And sometimes we'll win, sometimes we'll lose. I mean, it's complicated. So it's just about, I had the opportunity to serve on the BZA for years with Lenny Krawcheck. Lenny was the BZA chair. He was appointed by Mayor Gilliard, to give you an idea of how long he had served on the board. He predated Mayor Riley. So he had been there a long, long time. And we would see these hotel applications come through time and time again during my time. 100 unit, 200 unit. He didn't like any of these hotels. He didn't like what was happening to Charleston, right? But he would always tell me, and he would always say during the board meetings, it's not about my opinion. I'm here to apply the facts that are presented at this hearing to the ordinances that City Council approved. And if that departed from his personal opinion, that's what he would have to do to serve in his official role as a BZA member. And that's the attitude that's rare, but that's how you're supposed to approach this. It's not, I don't like hotels, even though that's allowed. And they followed the rules that City Council set. I just don't like it. And I'm going to kill this deal, right? It's not how it's supposed to work. And that same attitude directed at a hotel could be directed at an affordable housing project. And this is the kind of stuff that makes this, that's where the real rubber meets the road on some of these issues. So again, at the end of the day, we can structure our ordinances. We got to structure our ordinances as good as we can. But at the end of the day, it comes down to getting the right people nominated and put on these boards. And, that just is incumbent upon all of us to do that. And I think we've done a good job of that in the city of Charleston for the most part.
Thank you. Any other questions? We can move on.
All right, Councilman, this is my last one. So this last amendment that we're working on is for the commercial transitional district. It is in many of our standard zoning districts, the as a conditional use, affordable housing is one of the conditional uses that's allowed. For whatever reason, though, the commercial transitional district was not, when those rules were put in place, that was not a district where that was put. So this amendment would add CT to the list of zoning districts where affordable housing can be conditionally approved. And it makes an allowance for affordable housing as a conditional use, consistent with the same provisions that we have for the limited business, which is also a low intensity commercial district. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that is the end of my amendment updates. This is one that I believe went to Planning Commission last night, and council should see in September as well.
All righty. So everything that we have here was just for discussion and presentation, so it'll be coming back to council.
Correct. All of this is an update to the CD committee as they've requested to be kept apprised of amendments that are working their way through the system and through the Planning Commission, and then will come on to council for subsequent public hearings in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much. Okay, we are down to miscellaneous business. And I have one thing that I want to bring up, and if any council member don't want to bring it up, I think, oh, wait a minute now, we have, number 5.
Yeah, I was gonna say we have the redevelopment.
Redevelopment of 1000 King Street. Ms. Johnson, you're going to start that, or someone's going to?
Brian Hellman. Brian,
All right.
please begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Chairman Mitchell, Mayor, members of the committee, Brian Hellman here to talk about 1000 King Street. Together with me today, I have the ownership and development group, James Barnard, Michael Bastian, Mac Reese, Matt Mason, and Jonathan Yates should be on it as well, though he's traveling, so we may not see his face. So I think we're all familiar with this property, 1000 King Street. I'm old enough to remember it as County Hall, but most of my time was at King Street Palace. It's become 1000 King Apartments. There were for a number of years some affordable and workforce housing units there. That rolled off, and in the process of renovation, that's changed. But we're here today to really just bring, at Council Members Mitchell's request, an update of what we've been working on here. And if it's possible for me to share my screen, which, yes, I can.
Patrick, can you allow him that, please?
I've got it here.
Be able to, yeah.
Yep. Okay, let's see if this works.
Yep.
All right. So we all should be pretty familiar with this property, 1000 King Street. I understand it's one of the deepest parcels on King. It's nearly a quarter of a mile deep, and you can see it in the right-hand side here highlighted. Maybe you can see my cursor, and it abuts what will become Newmarket Park on the low line, which is right across from the spaghetti junction of I-26 and 17 and the Ravenel Bridge. And then you can see as King Street sort of widens there, Cleveland Street runs into 1000 King, which then takes you right into Hampton Park. And so as we now see it, this is the view that you see from King Street. What's sort of precipitated this redevelopment is our client started looking at the size of the property, and we met with Councilmember Mitchell, and we were talking about rezoning it from the DR2 zoning that it presently has into MU2. And Councilmember Mitchell, you'll probably recall, you said that you would not support MU2 because you wanted a stronger MU2. You wanted MU2 that would provide at least one parking space for every unit without the credits that you get for affordable or workforce housing. And you wanted affordable housing, not just workforce. So we started doing some work on behalf of the development and ownership team to look at some zoning, working with Eddie Bello and Eric Garris to come up with a design plan. And we put together a PUD because that was really the only way that we knew that we could guarantee the parking that the parking study required, and also to require the stronger affordable housing requirements that Councilmember Mitchell insisted on. And what those would do is, instead of the 20% workforce, the 20% would be broken up into two different groups or tranches. 75% or 3/4 of the 20% of the units would be the workforce as we know it in the MU2 district, 80% or less for rental. But then 25% or 1/4 of those units would need to be affordable, or 60% or less for the rental units. So we started working on a design. Architects and engineers came up with a plan. That plan, I hope you can see it now, looks sort of like this. There was actually an earlier version, and we went and we met with the neighborhood. We met with the planning department. The planning department said, "Hey, you can really create this great connection between the low line and Hampton Park. So we'd like to see what you can see in the bottom, I hope, of this screen, which is this green line, which takes you from low line Newmarket Park all the way to King Street, and that would be a connection. But also think about this area in the back where there are going to be some units constructed. You're against these really tall, 90-foot tall interstate and highway consider what could really fit back there appropriately. So we started designing all that and came up with, if I can walk you through the project, and let me know if your screen looks different than mine, but this is the new view of what you would see from King Street. So as you probably saw before, when you're on King, there's so much vegetation, you can't see the really cool Art Deco structure, which is 1000 King. So this would create a central opening flanked by townhouses on either edge of the property that would then open this nice corridor to see the Art Deco facade that's now being obscured. And then as we sort of work through, this is probably a better sort of peripheral view, we'll see the structure in the back. And in total, in sort of working through this project, we end up with about 42 units in the townhouses up front, of which we'd have 80% market rate, 20% workforce and affordable. And then the 75 units that are in the existing building, the former County Hall King Street Palace. And then in the back, there'd be approximately, let's see, it's about I don't think it's about 180 units. It gets us to about 250 total. To get there, we're currently in a 2.5 story district, and the change that we're allowed under the ordinance could get us to 3.5 to 4 stories. The height of the parking, of the interstate and the bridge behind us are about 90 feet. So we were designing to a little less than that, which took it to about 4 stories of units and 3 levels of parking. So that's actually where we hit a stopping point. We had some interest from the planning department to try to see what we could fit back there. We took that to North Central. Jonathan Yates met with the neighborhood. It's so far back, we didn't really have any objection. In fact, everybody really liked how it opened up the view of the facade of County Hall King Street Palace. And then we sort of hit a stopping point, and that really brought us to where we are now. Just from a numbers standpoint, this would create roughly 51 or 52 with the height of the back workforce and affordable units, about 10 or 11 units that would be affordable, and about 31 or 32 units in the latest plan that would be workforce. So I know you've had a very long agenda. We really are appreciative that you squeezed us in. I'd love to answer any questions and see if there's a way that we can try to move this project forward, given the opportunities that it presents.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation. Anyone have any questions? Councilman Gregory, I see your hands up.
Yeah, Brian, can you show me the one with the townhouses and the
this view?
Yes, I really like it. I didn't think that I would.
I know.
But now that I can really see it, I see exactly what you're doing. I just wanted to let you know, I really, really like the connectivity, especially Cleveland and the park and all that kind of stuff. I had pictured something totally different, but I really like what I see in these renderings.
I'd love to take the credit, but it belongs to Eric Garris and Eddie Bello, and neither of them could be here today.
Oh, yeah. I know their work.
Yeah, I wanted to, when Councilman Gregory asked me, I wanted him to see it because I wanted to make sure that he saw that we are not changing the facade of the old county hall, that you will be able to see it even from the street when you're walking by. And when you're pulling up in there, it's still going to be visible, which is the historical factor of the old county hall, if you may, which is 1000 King Street.
That's right. And right now, if you can see this, you really don't even see the building. The vegetation's built up so much in front that it's really hard to see from King Street. So it'll open that corridor back up.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions we have?
The mayor and Councilmember Appel
Okay.
have their hands up.
Okay. I don't know who had the hands up first, but I'll go to Councilor Appel first.
I'll be very brief. I just think this is a wonderful example of urban infill, density in the right places to, among other things, chip away at our affordable housing problem. Ms. Shaw Johnson has reminded us over the last couple of weeks that we've got a comprehensive plan that calls for 16,000 affordable units over the next 10 years. And that was a couple years ago. So we only got like 8 more years to get there, Councilman Mitchell. And it's got to come from a variety of different places. It can't just be all the city. It's got to be public sector, the private sector, private-public partnerships. We'll take it however we can get it. One of the most amazing statistics about the city of Charleston that blows a lot of people's minds. I'm not telling anybody on this call anything they don't know, but in the 1930s, there were close to 100,000 people that lived on the peninsula. That number is a small fraction of what it was back then. The peninsula can support a lot more people. And it'd be better, in my opinion, to have folks on the peninsula contributing to a diverse, dynamic, thriving community rather than seeing which new tract home development can reach the Ace Basin or the Francis Marion National Forest. That's not the right way to grow. The infrastructure won't support it. There's no plan for infrastructure to support it. This is exactly the type of development we need to see more of in the city of Charleston. And we as a council need to do everything we can to encourage and incentivize it. So Brian, thank you. Thank you and your team and everyone that's brought this forward.
Yeah, Councilor Appel, thank you so much for saying that. There is a little bit of help we need, and the help really relates to the part in the back where from the way the height district changes work and this parcel being so deep, we can only make a request to go from 2.5 to 3.5. And we've got 4 stories of residential in the back that's over 3 levels of parking. Compared to the interstate and the bridge, there's those are higher, but we need some help to figure out how to move that forward, and hopefully council could help us in that process.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. A couple of questions, if I may. And this first one is more curiosity, but you mentioned townhouses here. And when I think of townhouses, I think of the unit being one unit all the way up vertically, so to speak. Is that the intent? It appears more like, multi-level apartments or condo or suites that way, or is it really townhouses?
Mayor Tecklenburg, you are correct. They read like townhouses, but they are levels of apartments. That is correct.
Okay. All right. That was just a curiosity. So where does the taller structure proposed in the rear near the low line, how does that relate to kind of the highest part of that I-26 bridge spaghetti you mentioned?
Let me see if I have a height here that let me see if I can make this. So our highest level, we're at basically about 78 feet. So the interstate is about 90, and the highest, our roof line would be about 78 feet. So we're still below the highest of the interstate.
Yeah. I was just curious kind of how, go to your slide number 2 there, maybe where you.
Well, do you want this type view?
The one before it.
This one.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So just, yeah, I think the tallest one is that one right where your cursor is pointing right there. So
Right here.
yeah, basically you're right at where the highest one, I get it. Okay, so my next question was about the low line, and boy, do I appreciate the fact that you're providing that pathway, because the next closest one would be up on Grove Street, which you know, would allow pedestrians to go all the way from the low line to, you know, points west. So I was just curious though, have you thought about any other activation with the low line, like on the ground level, having a little cafe or a little plaza to where people going up and down the low line could stop in for, you know, for a cup of coffee or whatever? Just one of the goals that we have for the low line is to activate it at different points along the way. And since you're building a new building and you have such good frontage to it, I was just wondering if that was a consideration.
Yeah, that's a great question. And as part of the PUD, we put language in there about activating that and allowing a commercial use. Right now it's zone diverse residential. So
Right.
primarily a residential zoning, but in the PUD that we're proposing, there is language about that, and there is space in one of the designs for approximately it's about 2,300 square feet of retail type space that can be in the back there. That would be in the back against the low line, correct?
Yeah. Well, that would be good. And how much space did you say?
There's room for approximately 2,300 square feet at the back.
Okay. All right. So I would encourage you to, you know, maximize that, so to speak, and think about this being like a little stopover place along the way. And then it seems to me it would be wonderful to connect, if you haven't already, with the Charleston Housing Authority, and maybe make a connection to the south there, kind of that middle street. You know, it now, they have a very vibrant community garden on that property. And to be honest with you, there's this right in the center of those, looks like two streets intersecting on the instant home property. There's this really cool, it's like a chapel community building that we'd like to renovate one day, but to create some public access through that property in conjunction with your connectivity going east-west, you know, to try to do some north-south as well. Of course, we got the low line, we'll create that. But anyway, just thinking out loud, talking with Housing Authority would be a good thing.
Thank you. That's all very, I'm sorry.
Okay, Brian, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Gregory. I was just going to quickly say that all sounds great. And I know one of the things that we've also been talking about with, and maybe some of the team has been talking with the Housing Authority about using some of their streets that actually get into this property to use that to create access for perhaps emergency vehicles and like as well. So it could be pedestrian and emergency. So we see some opportunities there.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Brian,
Hold it. Councilman Gregory.
Yeah, if I can just piggyback on some of the mayor's observation, which I think are great. The same can be said for the space right behind math and science. That also butts the low line, if I'm not mistaken. Has there been any discussion with you guys and the school board with regard to that vacant space that they have back there? I know they park buses or something back there now, but it's a lot of space. And it's right next to what you're getting ready to construct on the back.
Yeah, Councilmember Gregory, I haven't had conversations. I know that some folks with my client have. And in fact, we had at some point tried to talk about utilizing all that space back there for parking or other uses, but the school district is very cautious, as we understand, about letting people on their property for safety reasons. But we are certainly, open to connectivity. And if you have any contacts that you would suggest that we talk to there about that, I mean, I think there are some opportunities in this whole area. This is going to be the connection first to the low line, and the low line itself back there for the school. I think is going to be an improvement.
Because I was talking to math and science way before then, but we had problems with the buses parking on King Street, and it was kind of blocking view, if you may, for people coming across King Street. So they started using that rear back there for their buses and everything else, because I told them they had to move it off the streets, and the people in the community start complaining so much, and that's when someone got hit. So that's why they move all those buses back there and then bring it out when it's time for the school to be closed. So that's something you have to try to work out with them, because they can't park those buses back on King Street because it blocked people coming out of Grove Street, because there's not a light there. We tried to put a light there from the DOT, and they say it's not warranted. So we couldn't even get that done. We tried more than one time with the neighborhood association and myself, but they said it's not warranted. So that kind of stopped that. So maybe you still can talk with them to see if there's anything that can be done with the property in the rear. All right, anyone else have any questions?
Mayor has his hand up, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And pardon me, this is just across the street, but since we're thinking about this area, has there been any progress on that property right across King Street with those two dilapidated houses? I know that they had tried to request to relocate them, and but the property they wanted to take them to was outside of the city, and the BAR wouldn't give permission. Anybody got any new news? We'd like to see something happen across the street as well.
Yeah. The last thing I heard, Mr. Mayor, was that's the same what you were saying now. The owner at one time wanted to give it away if they moved the houses, but then the BR said, no, if you move it, it has to stay in the city, stay in the city. So he got stuck with it, and it's still there. It looks a sight, it's going down. So he probably wait until it's fall down, I guess. But it's not moving. It's not moving. There's nothing happening to it at all. It's just sitting there. And that's a big piece of property, can be used, but he never wanted to get rid of the property. He just wanted to get rid of the houses off the property because he didn't want to repair it. And that's the last conversation we had a couple of years ago with him. And I don't know what's going on with him now at this point. So maybe if someone get back with him, maybe something else can be worked out, I guess.
Mr. Mayor, I'm James Barnard, one of the owners of the property. We've met a few times in the past. I've actually attempted to reach out to those owners several times, and no attempt whatsoever, because it's bothered me that it just sits there looking so poorly as the rest of the street is changing over in a pretty great way.
Yeah, we need to figure out some place, Gianna, to move those houses.
And even if you move them, just like we was having all this presentation with each one of those houses with the small, because of the Freeman cottages, the cost factor even to repair it, good gosh, it's going to be some money, so. But as long as you can find property to move it off of the property, then the owner, I don't know if he want to sell the property, or if he would let you do anything. I don't know that point, because he didn't want it to be. Was trying to talk with him, trying to sell the property itself, but he didn't hear it. He didn't want to hear it. And I don't know if he's still that same way or not. I don't know, but that's the point that we was getting. That's for years ago we was trying.
Gotcha. All right.
And we have made many attempts, Mayor and members of CD committee, but we will revisit it and see if there have been any changes in relation to the desires as it relates to those two properties.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Okay. On number 5, do we need to act on that at all? That's just for information at this time, Ms. Johnson.
I think they wanted city committee support, whatever that looks like, just supporting their current recommendation relative to what they're proposing. And Brian, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Ms. Shaw Johnson, that is correct, because the height district is set so low there in this property, this parcel, that where the height would go is so far in the back. The only way that this could be developed is through either the planning department or council, as I understand it, moving or supporting the height necessary against the interstate. There's that provision that only allows a one height district change, and this would be this would go from basically 2.5 to 3.5 up to, I think what we need is 6 in the back, 4 stories of residential with 3 stories of parking. That's not affecting the front of the property again, where the townhouse looking structures are, just all the way at the very, very back where this structure would be in the back of the property.
Thank you. One of the council members here.
One last question. And how, if we gave the variance for the height, would that show a couple of stories over the existing facade?
Yeah.
How would that relate? And how would that look from the street, from the front?
You can see it.
So, Councilor Gregory, that's what Eric Garris and Eddie Bellows studied, and given how far and how deep this property is, at almost a quarter of a mile deep, when you're on King Street, they did that analysis, and you effectively, as they say it, at grade, don't see it. That's what these were all about, that it's so far back, it's not really visible.
Okay. Thank you. I'm ready to make a motion, Mr.
Yes, I'm waiting.
I make a motion that we support this rendering and design as submitted.
Second.
Okay, it was moved and second that we support the rendering and design coming in formerly of 1000 King Street. Any other questions? All in favor, vote by saying aye.
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 Okay, ayes have it, so moved. So we don't have anything else on the agenda, but one thing I want to bring up on the Sumar Street, and I think I might have to add this to the agenda.
Probably not.
You can. Sorry.
You mean under miscellaneous?
Under miscellaneous. Someone tell me if I have to add it.
It depends, council member, if it's an action item or not.
Right.
You know, if it's an action item, you would have to have declared an exigency. And I don't know whether Sumar is, but anyway, if it's a non-action item, if it's just an instruction to staff or something, I think you can. And I think Councilman Gregory was going to discuss possibly adding it as council communications.
Yes, and I did discuss this with the chairman, and I think that's where he was headed with.
Yeah, and that would be fine to have this discussion.
Okay, Councilman Gregory, you want to do that? And I'll just ask someone to second it so we can go on with it.
Yes, just under council communications, I think for our September meeting, just be able to give staff a little more instruction on what our intent is with regard to who's to do what in terms of staff, any consulting firm that might be a developer might be a part of it. Just a discussion, and in that communication, it might require the body of a whole to vote. But at this point, it's just a discussion that we place something on the under communications on our next council meeting to have some further discussion and to provide instructions to staff on exactly what we meant when we talked about giving it to staff so that staff can do X, Y. I think we need to give them some clarification on that in terms of whether or not that would continue to involve Landmark.
in Councilman Gregory, if it would be appropriate with that discussion, the staff would be prepared after that discussion and after those instructions to bring something back to the next CD committee meeting on September 21st, if that would be appropriate.
That would be appropriate.
Okay, what happened to my computer here?
We see you.
You can see me?
Yes.
I can't see myself. Okay, come on. These things act up when you want it. Okay. I don't know what's going on with it. But so we'll need a motion for that to send it to the city council.
I don't think so, because I think Councilman Gregory wants to put that on the agenda.
Okay,
And he's given us notice that he wants that on the agenda for under council communications for the 12th, and we'll do that with these instructions. Is that okay, Councilman?
Yes, that's it exactly.
okay, that'd be
Thanks,
fine.
Rick.
Anyone have any questions on that?
No, let's move to adjourn.
If you don't have any questions, nothing else, we come before the committee and we can adjourn.
Good meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Thanks, y'all.